Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's an honor and privilege to rise today to speak to Bill C-12 from the territory of the Snuneymuxw First Nation and to serve the communities in Nanaimo, Ladysmith, and the unceded territory of Snuneymuxw, Stz'uminus, Snuneymuxw, and Liaxin First Nations. Climate concerns rank very high in my riding. On November 21st, I had the pleasure of taking part in the inaugural meeting of the Community Climate Hub here in Nanaimo. There were some great presentations and sharing of ideas about what we can do as a community to combat climate change. The ideas included creating active transportation-friendly streets, improving our local food system and lowering the carbon footprint of our food, energy retrofits for homes, businesses, and institutions, and transitioning from fossil fuel heating, oil and frack gas to electricity and heat pumps. There were suggestions for better public transit and for protecting the local natural environment and green spaces to ensure vibrant biodiversity, both within the city and in the surrounding area. It was an energizing meeting. Climate action at the personal and community level is important and necessary. But all of the actions that Canadians take individually and locally can be wiped out with the approval of a single diluted bitumen pipeline or a liquefied fracked gas terminal. Just days before this community meeting, the federal government tabled Bill C-12, the Canadian Net Zero Emissions Accountability Act. Unfortunately, this piece of legislation will not hold this government to account for emissions reductions, or the next government, or the government after that. The accountability doesn't start until 2030, and that accountability is weak at best. We need climate action and accountability now. In 2015, this government went to the Paris Summit with the Harper government's target to reduce emissions by 30% over 2005 levels by 2030. The government left Paris with that pathetic target in place and tried to pretend that that was the Paris target. In the Paris Climate Accord decision document, Canada agreed to set new emissions reduction targets in 2020 and every 5 years after that. It didn't happen. It wasn't until Earth Day this year, under pressure from the Biden administration, that the government increased the target to between 40 and 45% by 2030. That target is still completely inadequate and fails to address the urgency of the climate crisis. We still don't have the 2025 target that we committed to under the Paris Accord. The last IPCC report stated that we have just 10 years to bring emissions down substantially, or we can't keep global warming to under 1.5 degrees. The prospect of a livable future for our children and grandchildren is in peril. I've heard the argument too many times that what Canada does in terms of climate action will make no difference. But in fact, we are the 9th highest emitter of greenhouse gases on the planet and the 11th highest emitter of greenhouse gases per capita. When you compare greenhouse gas emissions reductions, we have the worst record of the G8. Canada is a climate laggard. The UK has a carbon budget law that binds governments to emissions targets and holds them accountable. In other words, it eliminates politics from climate action. In 1990, the UK produced 25% more emissions than Canada. They've reduced their emissions by 42% and made a commitment at Paris to reduce emissions by 68% by 2030. Collectively, the 27 countries of the European Union have reduced their emissions by 25% since 1990. Canada's current emission levels are 21% higher than they were in 1990. That's not climate leadership, it's shameful. Successive Liberal and Conservative governments have signed on to 9 international climate accords and have failed on every account. None of the governments that signed those agreements created a plan, and Canada has not met a single one of the commitments it has made. Canada's last target, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 17% below 2005 levels by 2020, was set by the Harper Conservative government in 2009. 8 provinces and 3 territories, representing 85% of Canada's population, were on track to meet that target. But 2 provinces, Alberta and Saskatchewan, increased greenhouse gas emissions so much that they completely wiped out the sacrifices, investments, and advances to climate action made by the rest of the country. These emissions increases can be attributed almost exclusively to the oil and gas industry. Where is the accountability? How is it that the federal government cannot ensure that the provinces work together to meet our international commitments? Now British Columbia is joining the rogue provinces ignoring Canada's commitment to climate action and accountability. BC is providing billions of dollars in fossil fuel subsidies for fracking and the export of liquefied fracked gas. LNG Canada is owned and controlled by 5 foreign multinationals. It will be the largest single source of greenhouse gas emissions in British Columbia. The BC government is practically giving the resource away by providing fracking companies with billions of dollars in deep well subsidies while only collecting a fraction in royalties. From the wellhead to the end consumer, fracked gas has the equivalent greenhouse gas footprint as burning coal for electricity. Extracting natural gas through hydraulic fracking releases methane into the atmosphere. For the first 20 years after it is released, methane is 80 times more potent than carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. Fracking uses and poisons huge amounts of water, poisons air sheds, and has been linked to increased risks of asthma, cancer, and birth defects. Fracking causes earthquakes, and yet the BC government allows it in the vicinity of huge hydroelectric dams. Many jurisdictions around the world have either placed moratoriums on hydraulic gas fracking or banned it outright. Some jurisdictions are also banning the installation of gas heating and gas appliances in new construction. Why? Because they understand that creating more demand for a product that releases climate-destroying methane is irresponsible. Fracking needs to be banned in Canada. It's incompatible with lowering carbon emissions, combating climate change, protecting fresh water, maintaining a healthy environment, and respecting Indigenous sovereignty, rights, and title. As I speak, some of the last big tree old-growth forests in BC are either being logged or are under immediate threat of being logged. Trees that sequester massive amounts of carbon, far more than an acre of seedlings. The BC government is allowing those trees to be cut down. And the BC government is also allowing whole trees to be ground up into pellets and exported as biofuel. That's not climate leadership. These are just some of the reasons that Canada needs a climate budget law. We need to take politics out of climate action and follow the science. The priorities of this government demonstrate that it's not serious enough about the existential threat of climate change. The government is spending $17 billion on the Trans Mountain pipeline expansion. Trans Mountain is not just a climate loser, it's a money loser. According to the Parliamentary Budget Office, the only way that TMX will result in billions of dollars in losses, that it won't result in billions of dollars in losses, is if the government abandons action on climate change and increases oil sands production. We need a just transition for fossil fuel workers and an end to all subsidies to the oil and gas industry. Research conducted by the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, which breaks down new and recycled spending promises, shows that the government is proposing to allocate just 0.25% of Canada's GDP towards climate action. That's far less than the 2% of GDP that leading climate economist Nicholas Stern says is needed to stop global warming from surpassing 2 degrees. Canada has committed $5.1 billion a year towards climate action when we need to be committing $40 billion a year. This is not climate leadership. The climate crisis is the defining struggle of our generation, just as World War II was the struggle of our grandparents' generation. Focusing on incentives for households and businesses is not enough. The government must take charge, force the provinces into line to meet our international commitments, and bind us to a whole-of-government approach that mandates action to win this struggle. The real obstacle is not climate deniers. It's politicians who recognize the science but lack the courage to remove politics from climate action. We need a carbon budget law. Bill C-12 is not it and does not meet the challenge before us. It provides a false sense of security and pushes long overdue action and accountability down the road for another decade. Young people across this country are demanding better from us. They and our children and our grandchildren deserve more than this weak piece of legislation. Thank you.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Kingston and the Islands.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just want to go back to part of the member's speech where he was talking about the offsets between different provinces. To be completely honest, it's not something that I was aware of entirely. He was suggesting that some provinces had done better, but then a couple others had done worse, which is what how the offset was calculated. Can he just expand on that, please?
The honourable member for Nanaimo, Ladysmith.
Sure. Yeah. If you look at the analysis of our 2020 target for Copenhagen, the Copenhagen Accord, Ontario met the target. Other provinces reduced their emissions and had a plan that they followed through on. And then they reduced their emissions by almost 17%, which was what the target was. And Alberta and Saskatchewan increased their emissions so much that we basically flatlined between 2005 and 2020. So we did not meet those targets. And what is happening now in British Columbia means that we are going to see a massive expansion in fracking for LNG Canada. And we know that gas fracking is terrible for the climate. It's a climate killer. When you put methane into the atmosphere, it's 80 times more potent as a greenhouse gas, and it's going to create a serious problem for us. So we have a third province now that's hopped on this bandwagon of being a climate rogue. And the federal government needs to step up and show leadership and make sure that the provinces are held to account for our international agreements.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Laurentides-Labelle. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have a question to ask my colleague. First, I really appreciated the details. So when we talk about checks, we remember, and we will remember for the rest of our days. I would like to hear about what his opinion is of things that haven't happened yet, and the fact that there is partisan politics that is going on to save the economy, and if investments in innovation in the environment over the last decade had occurred, we would already see a move to green energy. I'd like to hear some comments on that. Thank you. The Honourable Member for Nanaimo, Ladysmith.
Well, I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for her question. Yeah, we have been so far behind in this country that other countries are far ahead of us. But there's actually technology that's being developed in Canada that is being used in Europe. So Corvus Energy in Richmond designed the battery system that has electrified the ferry fleet in Denmark and Sweden and Norway. We have a company in Mississauga that is creating hydrogen trains, locomotives for the European train system. So Canadian technology is being developed. We could be farther ahead on that kind of technology development if we were promoting it as a government and not just sitting back on and having our economy dependent on the extraction, rip and ship of raw resources, so that when a pipeline gets canceled, we have to have an emergency debate.
We have time for a brief question. The honourable member for South Okanagan, West Kootenay.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I'd like to thank the member from Nanaimo, Ladysmith for his speech. And we've heard the term walk the walk many times today. It reminds me of I was at a G20 energy meeting in Argentina 3 years ago where the UK minister got up and said, we have to walk the walk. And he was referring to legislation, climate accountability legislation that the UK brought in. And now we have a bill before us that kicks the can down the road another decade with weak targets. And I guess I'm despairing at what we have to do here to get that sense of urgency. And I'm just wondering if the member can comment on that.
Brief answer from the member for Nanaimo, Ladysmith. I
feel your urgency. I I feel the member's urgency, Madam Speaker. I'm a grandfather now, and I fear for my children and my grandchildren's future. And this bill is not accountable at all. 2028 is when we're going to do a review of our 2030 targets. Not good enough. 2023 is when we're supposed to be doing a stock taking of how our targets are being adhered to for our 2020 target, for our 2025 target. The Paris Accord doesn't even mention 2030. We are climate laggards in this country, and we need to get down to it and be accountable, and we need a carbon budget law like the UK has.